You are listening to the latest message from Bar None Cowboy Ministries, where we don't care about your past, but care about your future. We hope you are encouraged by today's message.
All right. Tonight, we're going to continue on through our church history stuff, and we're getting a little further in. We are now at the 7th and 8th centuries. So the 600s and 700s, and we're going to just touch 880, just the first year in the 800 portion. But we're coming along, and tonight I'm really going to focus on two little aspects of this century, because it has a huge impact of what is going to be going on, and you need to know this stuff. There has been a saying that has said, if you do not learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. Right? Okay, that comes from a American and Greek philosopher. He wrote that in a book in 1905. So he was aware of it back then, and he is absolutely true. If we do not learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. And there is something that is happening right now that we can see that is coming that we have not learned from history. And that is why tonight we are going to go over that issue, because if we do nothing about it, we're going to repeat the exact same situation that has happened here in the 7th and 8th centuries. During these 2 centuries, it brought about another religion that began to start to take over the region. And it started in the 7th century and even holds true to today. And they took over this area in a very, very short amount of time. Does anybody know what this religion may be? Islam. Islam started here in the 7th century. Islam spread very, very rapidly during these 2 centuries. In fact, it spread so fast, it only took 120 years to take over the area that is in. Katie, can you do me a favor? Go to my office, and on top of the printer, there is a map that is sitting up there. I have printed up a map, and I wanted to show you of just how much territory that they took over in just 120 years. We have to remember something here. Remember during the Roman Empire, when we learned just about it last time, of it falling because of there's 2 groups. Does anybody remember those 2 groups' names? Visigoths and Ostrogoths. Okay, these 2 groups came in and they pretty much demolished the Roman Empire at that region. In fact, they broke their way in, like we saw last time, and they split the empire up into 2 sections. The eastern portion of Europe and northern Africa ended up becoming the Byzantine Empire. You might have heard of them. They were the empire that still were held over from the Roman Empire until the 1400s, when finally who came in and defeated them? The Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire. So the Byzantine Empire was the eastern remnant of the Roman Empire. The Western Empire, it was really controlled by Rome. It's where Rome was, Italy is, and those 2 fractions kind of had butting of heads with each other for territory and sovereignty. So we're going to look at that a little bit later on. But towards the end of the 5th century, thank you, towards the end of the 5th century, there were these people group in the eastern side of the empire towards the Byzantine Empire that were fighting with each other. The Persians. Have you ever heard of the Persians? The Persians started to fight against the Byzantine Empire. We're not going to talk much about them, but I just want you to know for over 30 years, the Persians and the Byzantine Empire were fighting against each other, trying to have territory and all that. But that part is important to know because it led to how fast Islam could spread. Not because Islam coming in and taking over and fighting against them. It's because they were fighting for over 30 years. Resources and stuff were weakening. Both of them, they were spent. Both of these people were weakening. So anyways, we're going to go into the rise of Islam. If you remember back in May, we spoke about Islam. We went into more detail about it, really about a little bit of its founders, what their belief system are, things of that sort. I want to share with you tonight how they spread so quickly. Muhammad, does anybody remember when Muhammad was born? No, nobody has any notes out. 570 AD. Muhammad was born in 570 AD in a little town called Mecca. Mecca is in current day Saudi Arabia. And he was born there. And around 610 AD, he began to have these visions. And that's where he saw in a cave and started to formate all of Islam through this portion. Well, right after he did that, he wanted to go out and start evangelizing the people, saying this is the true God. Because at that time period, there in Mecca, it was really a pagan-ruled society. There really wasn't a religion that was going on, but it was just paganism that was happening there. And so in Mecca, where he was at, they didn't quite like him trying to push his stuff on them. So in 622, he was being persecuted, and he was being persecuted so much so that he had enough of it, and he took off to the north with around 70 men with him. He ran away from Mecca. He landed in a place called Medina. There in Medina, it was a Jewish-ran community. He was able to have political influence and gained political control over Medina. And after he had became controlling of that area, what do you think he did to the Jews? You remember? He sent 2/3 of them away. He exiled them from the community. And then what did he do to the other third? Yep, they're gone. He executed them. He slaughtered them. Well, just a few years after that, by 630, he had enough followers to go back and fight Mecca. The same people that ran him away. He had over 10,000 men in a troop. I mean, this is like 8 years. In just 8 years, he had gained 10,000 followers to do this. So he went to Mecca. He goes back to Mecca, and he surrounded the city of Mecca and was able to take control of the city. There, after he took control of it, he was declared the head of the state. You know, that's kind of convenient, right? You know, you take over a place, oh, now you're the you're the king of this area. Well, he didn't have control of it very long, because just 2 years later, he passed away in 632 AD. After he died, there were some groups that were fighting against each other to figure out who's going to be the successor to Muhammad. If you'll remember, this is where the caliph system came into play, which really means the successors. Now, there were other groups that were in there that didn't quite like all that, and they just went off and became nomads of their own sort. But this caliph system, the succession, they began to expand the Islamic empire by peace? Question mark? No. By conquest and by force. Here's the map I want to show you, and I'm going to pass this around so you can see it a little bit better. This map shows there's Mecca right here, and in this Texas A&M color, maroon, that is the empire that Muhammad was able to conquer. He did that from 622 to 632. The burnt orange, nasty, the ugliest looking color in the world might be the University of Texas. If you look at that color, this is where the caliph system, what we're talking about right now, how far they were able to conquer. And that was 632 to 661. So in just a matter of 30 years. Now, shortly after that, this yellow section, you will see that goes up to 750 AD, 120 years after Islam had formed. And you can see how fast this had grown. And so I'm going to pass this around so you can look at it and look at it as we see. So anyways, this caliph system, they began to expand the Islamic empire by battles and conquest and killings. The Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, they were so weak from battling with each other for 30 years. They did not have the resources. They did not have the manpower. They did not have the morale. And this allowed the Islamic Empire to come in and conquer it very, very, very easily. Because there was a power vacuum that was happening. They were able to go into these places and gain control. Well, by the end of 661 AD, the Islamic Empire had already spread and gained control from the northeastern side of Africa up to Turkey and even into, or just right at the border of where India is at this moment. Very, very fast. Why do we think that they did that so fast? Not only because of the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire were beaten down, but Christians at that time, some of them would fight, some of them were battling with each other, but a lot of them were more so pacifists in that area. They did not want to really engage in battle because what are we supposed to do? Turn the other cheek, right? We're supposed to figure out ways to be able to exist with these other people. They were also very, very exhausted from wars that were happening. And politically, Christians stood no chance against the Islamic Empire. You may hear people say that the Crusades were very, very bad. Who have heard that the Crusades are bad? Why? We've heard that said that they're bad because Christians were the ones that went and attacked the Muslims. The people that say that, they don't know history. They don't know history. It was Muslims first that came and attacked the Christians. So the Crusades were just taking back their territory. This is what they were doing. And the problem is that Islam came and took Christianity first, mainly by the sword. Jihad. Not by peace, but by the sword. And here is where we need to learn our history. And I don't care if this gets me canceled or whatever. The church cannot be pacifist and stay silent while Islam is starting to take over America. Don't believe me? Don't believe me? That I know all y'all do. All y'all know that Islam is starting to take over. Do you know how many mosques are here in Texas? Over 330. Do you know how many of them are in Dallas alone? Over 60. And McKinney, just this past week, voted 7-0 to allow another 5-acre mosque to be set up there. We cannot, as a church, cannot sit back and allow them to come in and conquer us. We can't be like the church in England who is sitting back and allowing Islam to take over England. Look at what happened in New York City. Look what is happening right now, the other people that are running for office in other places. Those, I don't know. But yeah, they're up for elections. People will call them, or they will even call themselves a religion of peace. But when you look at this history, when you look at how they spread, it was not by peace, but it was through brutality. And if we do not learn from our history, it's going to come and take us over. So we should not be silent over that. They were able to conquer so fast because you were either going to be slaughtered or you were forced to convert. Media, the internet right now will not agree with me in how I'm saying these people came to take over. Well, guess what? I've got my information from books that cannot be erased by revisionist history from the internet. This is what had happened. Once these Muslims took over an area, they set up a political system within that own region that allowed non-Muslims to be a part of. And I did not even mention this when we talked about it. But this system that they set up is called the Dahimi system. And it, in air quotes, allowed Christians and others to worship and practice their religion. However, they were subject to very, very high taxes and also persecuted. But they had this system called the Dahimi system that they could choose to be underneath. A town could choose it that they were in. Now, they only gave two options. When the Muslims took over these areas, they only gave two options. You can either go by our Dahimi system, which is a higher taxes on you and being persecuted, or we can take you by force. One of the two options. That was it. So either abide by their law or be killed. By the way, Sharia law actually is a part of this Dahimi system. Okay? All this is coming back into play. Are they taking us by force by killing us? Not at this moment. But who's to say later on that they do? Probably will happen. It'll probably happen again. So we cannot sit back and be quiet about this because they've already proven in history how they were to overtake that area. And if you looked at that map, it is pretty much all, it is all the bottom half of Europe on into Africa. Where there was once Hippo, Augustine of Hippo. Remember, we talked about it. Good Christian area. They took that over real fast. So does this sound like a religion of peace? I don't know what peace you're talking about. It's not. Now let me start to mention these conquests that they were able to do. I'm just going to mention the names of them and I'm going to give you the date. If you're interested, go look them up because we do not have time of how many there are to look at each one of these. First of all, the conquest of Syria happened in 634 to 641. The conquest of Egypt happened in 639 to 642. The conquest of Mesopotamia and Persia happened in 633 to 651. Then the caliph at that time, that was the orange area you saw on that map, the caliph at that time passed away and went and another successor came. However, by the end of 750 AD, Islam had went from India into North Africa all the way into Spain. And in fact, they were trying to gain more territory, trying to go into France. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. The conquest of Sindh, which is in between Pakistan and India, happened in 711 to 714, 3 years. Conquest of Maghreb, which is all of the northern Africa area, happened between 647 to 742. That was the longest conquest that they had. The conquest of Spain, 711 to 721, 10 years. And the conquest of Transoxiana, which is Uzbekistan and a little bit into Kazakhstan. That happened from 673 to 751. 120 years they were able to conquest all this land and make it Muslim. To this day, most of that area that is on that map, except from Israel, actually, most all of that map that's there is underneath whose control? Muslims' control. Muslims' control. Why are we fighting Iran? Muslim control. Really, that's what this is. They are the, I don't know. But they are the largest, they are the largest and fastest growing religion here in America. And if we are not careful, if we do not learn, if we stay silent and we shut up, we're going to be taken over as well. So learn from your history. Now we're going to go into an area called France. At that time it wasn't called France, but we know it as France. During the 3rd century, so we're going to back up a whole lot for just a minute. During the 3rd century, the Germanic tribes, a little bit of those that we talked about last week, they started to move into the area that we know of France, and they settled there. Those that settled there in France were called the Franks. In fact, that is where we get the term France from, is they were called the Franks. They lived in peace and harmony pretty much for a while. They did their own little thing. They had their own government system. They had a king and all of that, and they were doing pretty good by themselves until people started to invade in on their territories. Well, in 711, right after some of the conquests of Spain, or not at that point yet, in 711 there was a Muslim army from northern Africa that had went and invaded Spain. And by 7 years after they took control of all of Spain, in the year 718, the Visigoths had collapsed, who was over Spain at that time. They had collapsed and was in control of Islam. Well, with most of all of that area under their control, the Muslims began to start to want more territory and continued over the Pyrenees Mountains. However, when they arrived into Frankish territory in 732, they encountered some people that they probably did not want to encounter. A guy by the name of Charles Martel. In 732 AD, Charles Martel was the king of the Franks at this moment. He went and met them near a place called Tours, and he kind of showed the Muslims who's boss. He defeated them, didn't kill them all, but they suffered very significant losses. And that night, after that battle, that night they fled to Spain. They fled back home to Spain. And ever since then, they have not tried to take over again. So this guy was pretty good. However, that king, Charles Martel, he had a son by the name of Pepin the Short. Pepin the Short. I don't know how tall he was, but that is his name, Pepin the Short. In most kingdoms, and we have seen it in the Roman Empire as well, after the emperor or the king dies, who is next in line? Usually somebody in the family. So Pepin the Short took over and was declared the king of the Franks in 751. Well, there was another group that was starting to pop its little ugly head around Italy. And in 751, this group called the Lombards. They had conquered the territory in Ravenna, there in Italy. And Ravenna was the seat of the Byzantine Empire there in Italy. Kind of like an embassy, as you would know. Because, of course, the Western Empire wasn't fully on board with the Byzantine Empire. They just kind of had a little consulate area there. Anyways, so in 751, the Lombards, they were demanding the Pope to give them favor. And if the Pope did not give them favor, they were threatening to go to take over Rome. Well, Pope Stephen II, in 754, traveled to France. And he met with Pepin the Short. That's so funny. Pepin the Short, and asked him for military help to to help him out, to protect Rome, to protect the area from the Lombards. Well, just 2 years later, Pepin obliged, and 2 years later, in 756, the Frankish army forced the Lombard king to surrender, and then it was taken back over by the Western Empire. But however, before they did this, Pepin the Short gave all that territory that he had just claimed from them over to the Pope. Not to the empire, but to the Pope. Made him the ruler of the whole area. And made him the ruler over all of the papal states in Italy. Don't know how this happened, but it happened. It was crazy. Pepin the Short had a son by the name of Charles. You may have heard of this man's name. His name was, we know him as Charlemagne. You might have heard of Charlemagne. He's also called Charlemagne the Great, Charles the Great. But Charlemagne was Pepin the Short's son. Well, Pepin died. Guess who came to be in power? Charlemagne. Here's the crazy part about it. How old do you think Charlemagne was when he became in power? He was a little younger than a teenager. 10 years old. He was 10 years old when he became king. Well, of course, he grew up a little bit, and he had three main goals in mind of how he wanted to see the Frankish Empire expand. First of all, he wanted military power so that he was able to crush his enemies. Second of all, he wanted religious power so that he could take control of their spiritual side. Third of all, he wanted to take over the education system and get their intellects through the power of both their minds, their spiritual, and what? Military. He wanted to take over all three of those. And we're going to see he does do that. I think it was actually him, because of especially how his father was through this. Charlemagne was able to conquer the Bavarians and the Saxons, and he ruled over the pagans with a very, very, very strict laws. Here's some of the laws that they had. First of all, the pagans could not eat meat during Lent. Okay, not so bad. You could not cremate a dead body. That was a pagan practice from the old. That was illegal. And then if you pretended to be baptized, I thought this was funny. If you pretended to be baptized and basically as a fake Christian, you could be sentenced to death if they found out that you were a fake through there. Well, Charlemagne, he also intervened, just like his father. He intervened with the politics that was happening in Italy. Remember, most of his kingdom at that time period was up into France, and it had a huge influence all the way down into the Italian peninsula area. But he loved to dabble in their politics as well. They had a good little allyship going. Well, remember the king, that Lombard king that once tried to invade Italy? And he went back. He got a little braver this time. He said, okay, enough time has passed by. I'm going to go try to invade once again. Well, the Pope at that time period asked, of course, Charlemagne for some help. And Charlemagne ended up defeating the Lombards in 774, and they declared Charlemagne their king over that whole area. Well, he decided to take it upon himself to be responsible over the governing of the state, but also be responsible to reform the Christian society back to where it was, including the church and his empire. He had summoned a lot of church councils to come together. He issued laws to things. He had clergy put into place. He established monasteries, school systems, all of that. It wasn't a bad deal. He standardized liturgy within the church, and he intervened in some controversies, theological controversies that were happening. His government that he had was deeply involved in religious affairs. Very, very deeply rooted in there. Well, as you can guess, this caused a little bit of tension between the church and the state. While some people, especially in Rome, called the aristocrats, they didn't quite want church being involved with their dealings. And then, of course, there were some in the church that says, we don't want the state involved with our dealings. However, Charlemagne was like, yep, you're going to have them. We are going to take over the church. Well, the Pope was becoming more politically powerful, and the Emperor, Charlemagne, was becoming more and more involved with the governance of how the church should operate. Charlemagne and Pope Leo III had a pretty good relationship with one another, and they kind of worked really, really well. And because of their relationship with each other, it transformed the papacy to what we see it today. Pope Leo didn't come from an aristocratic family. Most all the other popes, actually all the other popes before then, came from a high aristocratic family from Rome. Well, Pope Leo didn't. He grew up there in the church. He served his time, I guess you'd say, and gained influence within there and gained power through there. And that's how he got himself up into being the papacy. Leo changed how things were working in Rome politically. So much so that the Pope controlled things like land. He controlled all the land there in Rome. He could tell what people could build or what not to build. He had control of the money. The Pope had control of appointments of people into government positions. He had legal authority. He was over all of agriculture. And this is the funniest part, considering how the church is, the Roman Catholic Church is today, is they had complete and total control of the tax revenues. So, to be whoever controlled the papacy, controlled pretty much the whole economy of Rome. Whoever had the most influence over the papacy had all of the economic resources available to them. So Charlemagne had a very great relationship with Pope Leo III. Do you think people really liked how that was being operated? No, especially not the aristocrats. The aristocrats did not like Pope Leo having that much control over Rome. They wanted a little bit of it as well. So they got together and they decided that they wanted to do something about it. Pope Leo, on April 25th, 799, he was practicing in a processional of a festival that was going on at that time. And while he was in this processional, he came across a monastery. And when he got right past that monastery during that festival is when he got jumped. Conspirators came out and they tried to oppress him. Now their goal was not to fully kill Pope Leo. They wanted him taken out, but they did not want to fully kill him. What they had planned to do is they were planning to gouge his eyes out and cut off his tongue. And there's a reason behind this. The reason behind this is because in the church at that time period, a physical mutilation of a body permanently disqualified you from holding office in the church. So if they were to gouge his eyes out and to cut off his tongue, he would be permanently disqualified from serving as the Pope. He would have to be taken out from there. They also did this because they did not want the political backlash of an assassination. So doing some damage to them would get what they wanted. They weren't successful. Weren't able to do this. Pope Leo escaped. He got away and he fled north to where Charlemagne was. When he got to where Charlemagne was, he asked for his protection. Charlemagne said, "Yep, I'll take care of you." He went back, Pope Leo went back to Rome, and while he was there and of course had protection with him, Charlemagne became really the protector of the Pope. Well, Charlemagne eventually went down to Rome in 800 AD, where he presided over the trials of these conspirators that was against Pope Leo. You can't tell me this is like conflict of interest big time. He presided over these meetings. And of course, did you think that he would to give mercy and grace to the conspirators? Nope. Didn't do so. Well, anyways, after they were taken care of, Charlemagne stayed there in Rome and restored order back to it. Pope Leo regained his political powers that he once had. Well, Pope Leo decided he wanted to honor Charlemagne. So, Pope Leo had a coronation and named Charlemagne as the Emperor of Rome in 800 AD. This extended Charlemagne's empire and the Pope's empire as well. And Charlemagne used these circumstances as an excuse to try to unite the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. Remember, I said they were still separate on certain things. The Western Empire, and specifically in Rome, did not care for the empress there in the Byzantine Empire. They did not even see them as a ruler at that moment. And so Charlemagne wanted to combine them together and have like Rome, the Roman Empire again, bring them all back together. And of course, his motives were to be the total emperor over the Roman Empire again. Well, that didn't happen. And you're going to see this later on, but there were battles and they fought for years and years and years all throughout the Middle Ages over who had what territory, and each one of them remained independent and sovereign of each other. And like I said last week, when that split happened between the Byzantine Empire, the Constantinople, and Rome, they started to split off. And they just get wider and wider away from each other. But what do you think Pope Leo's motives were? A lot of it was money. He wanted to have, his motivation was to give the papacy and the church implicit authority over the empire. He wanted the church to rule over all of the empire, nobody else. This set precedent. Pope Leo set precedent of naming an emperor that every other pope behind Pope Leo started to name emperors. This gave the papacy a ton of authority and power to where it was so corrupt, to where we will learn later on, especially during the 1500s, during the Reformation period, the church was so corrupt, and it started long before Pope Leo, but it really took off then at this moment. The church had the authority over land, money, all the finances, agriculture, all of that. While Charlemagne, the emperor, was actually over the Pope really thought that he was the head over it all. So there's where we're going to end, at the beginning of the 9th century, in the 800s AD. And like I said at the very beginning, you see during the 7th and 8th centuries the expansion of Islam and how quickly they were able to take over. And this is not the end for Islam. You know, we just kind of went from a different era, from the rise of Islam to Charlemagne coming in. But you need to know these sort of things, because Christianity and Islam has always been battling with each other and always will until the end. Okay. Anything else? Pray and we'll be out of here. God, thank you again for us being here, Lord. I pray that specifically for our church, Lord, that we will not be silent in letting these Muslims and Islamic empire take over like they once had. God, I ask that you give us boldness and courage to fight against it. Lord, I ask that we will learn as a nation from history and that we will not allow this to happen. God, I ask that you will place people in the voting areas to be able to help curb this the way that we know of right now, to help stop it. God, I thank you for this history, and I thank you for letting us be able to learn from it. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Amen. Have a great rest of your night.
Now we have another portfolio, right?
We thank you for listening to today's message at Bar None Cowboy Ministries in Omaha, Texas. We invite you to connect with us on Facebook or YouTube. We hope that you were encouraged by today's message.